The river flowed silently in the dim light of dawn, its gentle current carrying the chill of the late evening. Mist clung to the water's surface, swirling like ghosts lost in the fog. The sun has already set, and the world lay in a quiet stillness, as though holding its breath. The air was crisp, and the light of the late afternoon danced upon the river's surface, turning it into molten gold. Blacksmith Cormac rowed his boat gently across the darkening waters. The trip to the capital had been fruitful. His craftsmanship had impressed King Edric of Wessex, who purchased a full set of swords for his royal guard. The coins weighed heavily in Cormac's satchel, and a sense of pride filled his chest. The blacksmith's work was often solitary, but today, his talents have found favor with the king himself. As he rowed closer to the familiar shores near his home, Cormac's brow furrowed. From the distance, he heard faint sounds that were unmistakable to his ears. The clang of metal against metal, the echo of steel on steel. There were occasional cries as bright lights flickered on the horizon. A battle. The sight made his grip on the oars tighten. An instinct urged him to turn back and investigate. But caution tempered his curiosity. This was no place for a blacksmith, even one with a heart as brave as Cormac's. He chose a different course, navigating his small boat toward the quieter coves away from the fray. But as he neared the shore, he stopped abruptly, his eyes widening at the sight of something in the water, a small form bobbing on a piece of driftwood. Cormac's heart skipped a beat as he rowed closer, and the shape took the form of a child, soaked and shivering, his tiny fingers clinging to the wood for dear life. With a deft hand, Cormac hauled the boy into the boat. The child was small, no older than 3 summers, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes wide with terror. He trembled uncontrollably, drenched to the bone. He wrapped him in a rough woolen blanket he kept in the boat, trying to warm the boy as best he could.
"Where are you from, lad? Who are you?"
he asked gently, but the boy's eyes were distant, his lips blue and silent. He looked up at Cormac, but his voice was locked behind the fortress of his fear and exhaustion. Cormac sighed, understanding that words would not come easily to one who had just seen the edge of death. Cormac rowed with renewed purpose, steering his boat towards the village where his forge lay on the outskirts, a place secluded and seldom visited. It was his quiet life led, but one filled with the steady rhythm of hammer and anvil, the comforting glow of the forge's fire and the scent of iron and smoke. It was a place far removed from the affairs of kings and battles, a place where a frightened boy might find peace. He carried the child from the boat, cradled in his strong arms, and walked the short distance to his humble home. Inside, the warmth of the hearth greeted them, and Cormac set about tending to the boy with a gentle hand, drying him and offering what food he could find. The child remained silent, his eyes watching Cormac with a wary curiosity. Days turned into weeks, and though the boy spoke little, he stayed. He named him Aedan, after a warrior of old who had been both fierce and gentle, a fitting name, Cormac thought, for a child who had survived the unforgiving waters and whatever terrible fate had befallen him. In time, Aedan's silence softened. He watched as Cormac worked the forge, the firelight dancing in his eyes. The blacksmith taught him to shape metal and to understand the language of iron and steel. A bond grew between them, not of blood, but of shared moments and unspoken understanding. Cormac, who had lived alone for so long, found joy in the boy's presence. And Aedan, once lost and adrift, found solace in the rhythm of the hammer, the hiss of steam, and the warmth of a home. Though no one came seeking the boy, Aedan flourished under Cormac's care. He grew strong and skilled, inheriting the blacksmith's craft as though it were his own birthright. They lived quietly, content on the outskirts of Wessex, where the past remained shrouded in mystery and the future was forged in the glow of Cormac's fire. Years passed and Aedan grew taller and stronger, his once scrawny frame filling out with the hard-earned muscle that came from working at the forge. Under Cormac's watchful eye, the boy transformed from a frightened child into a skilled apprentice, learning the art of sword-making as if it were second nature. The clanging of metal became the heartbeat of their home, a constant rhythm of hammer strikes echoing through the woods beyond the village. Cormac taught Aedan more than simply the methods of forging steel. He taught him patience and accuracy, as well as the need to keep a blade balanced, not just in weight, but in spirit. A sword, he added, was more than just a weapon. It was a manifestation of the warrior's resolve. A sword could kill or defend, and using it needed both power and intelligence. They would get up before the light in the morning, the crisp early air making their breath missile. Together they would feed the forge's fire until it roared to life, shaping raw iron into swords that shone with lethal intent. Cormac's calloused and scarred hands moved with the dexterity of decades of experience. Despite being young, Aedan's hands picked up quickly, imitating Cormac's motions until their skill level was on par with the best smiths in the nation. Following the forging and polishing of the swords, Cormac led Aedan to the grassy area behind the forge, where they engaged in a wooden practice sword duel. The sound of wood hitting wood filled the air as Cormac showed Aedan how to attack quickly and powerfully, how to parry and riposte, and how to keep his position. The blacksmith was more than simply a skilled artisan. He was a former warrior who taught Aedan all he knew about fighting with each blow and each word.
Keep your stance wide, Aedan. Never let your guard down,
Cormac would say, his voice steady but firm.
Your sword is an extension of your arm, but your mind is the true weapon.
Aedan took each lesson to heart, and with every passing year he grew more adept with the sword. He was not only strong but also swift and clever, with the unyielding determination of someone who knew how fleeting safety could be. Aedan's movements became fluid, almost graceful, as he combined Cormac's teachings with his own natural agility. The boy who had once been lost and afraid was now a young man, strong of limb and courageous of heart, forged by fire and tempered by the love of the man who had raised him. However, there was unrest in the world beyond their forge. The reports of Viking longships seen off the coast, their sails as black as ravens' wings, began to loom large in the marketplaces and taverns. Word of attacks and looting quickly spread, with small towns being destroyed by fire and their inhabitants being killed or sold into slavery. With even more ferocity than before, the Northmen had returned, and their shadow hung over the western lands like a gathering storm. One evening, as they sat by the forge, the flames casting long shadows around them, they listened to the distant tolling of a bell, a signal that raiders had been sighted nearby. Cormac looked at Aedan, his eyes clouded with worry. The boy was no longer a child, but he was not yet a man grown, and Cormac knew the danger that awaited.
These are troubled times, Aedan,
Cormac said, his voice heavy.
The Vikings show no mercy. You must be ready, not just with your sword, but in your heart. A warrior fights not for glory, but for what he holds dear.
Aedan nodded, his mouth clenched in resolve. He had heard stories of the ferocity of the Vikings and how their raids were rapid and merciless, leaving only ash and grief in their wake. However, He had also seen Cormac's unwavering will, a silent power that had taught him more than any blade could have.
"I'm ready, Father,"
Aedan said, his voice steady.
"I will protect what is ours."
While pride filled Cormac's heart, there was also a hint of worry, since no parent wants to see their kid go into danger. Nevertheless, he was aware that he could not keep Aedan off his route. The night he discovered the youngster drifting on the river had sealed his fate, and now it was about to come to an end. Weeks passed, and Aedan kept up his training with even more vigor. He exercised in the clearing alone, without Cormac, using a steel blade in lieu of his wooden one. His resolution was evident with every swing and push, as he pledged to resist any harm that may arise. He had evolved from being a young man brought up by a blacksmith to being a warrior who had been shaped by his own willpower. One evening the forge was silent, with just a burning ember casting a warm, flickering light around the chamber. Cormac and Aedan sat by the fireplace, completing their basic lunch of bread and stew. The night was peaceful, but there was an unpleasant silence in the air, a sensation of something unsaid that had been on Cormac's mind for years. He looked at Aedan, a young guy with powerful shoulders and determined eyes, his black hair unkempt after a day at work. Cormac set his bowl aside and took a deep breath. He had been dreading this conversation for a long time, but with the threat of Viking raids looming, he knew that Aedan deserved to hear the truth about his past.
Aedan,
Cormac began, his voice unusually soft.
there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago.
Aedan looked up from his bowl, sensing the seriousness in Cormac's tone. He leaned forward, his brow furrowing slightly.
"What is it, Father? You look troubled."
It's about the night I found you.
Cormac said, choosing his words carefully.
You've grown up thinking of me as your father, but the truth is, I am not your real father.
Aedan's eyes widened, surprise flickering across his face. He set his spoon down, leaning closer to Cormac.
"What do you mean? You've always been my father."
Cormac sighed deeply, his eyes distant as he recalled that fateful night.
I was rowing home along the river, just like any other evening after selling my swords to King. But then I heard something in the distance, sounds I knew all too well, clashing swords, screams, the bright glow of fire on the horizon. I didn't know what was happening, but I sensed danger and knew I had to steer clear.
He paused, his voice growing heavier with the weight of memory.
As I rowed toward the shore, I saw something drifting in the water, a small figure clinging to a piece of wood. It was you, Aedan. You were just a boy, floating alone in the dark. I pulled you into my boat, and you were wearing an elegant nightshirt, far finer than anything a child of a blacksmith would wear.
Cormac continued, his voice tight.
I later heard rumors that an Irish chieftain had been ambushed and killed that night, not far from where I found you. His family and guards were slaughtered, and his lands were burned. I've often wondered if you were his son, spared by fate, but swept away by the river.
Aedan looked into the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in his eyes. He felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, sadness, and a flicker of something that felt like understanding.
"I've seen that night in my dreams,"
Aedan said quietly, his voice tinged with the echo of old fears.
"In the fog there's fire and I hear screams, but it's all blurred, like a nightmare I can't fully remember. I always wake up before I can see more."
Cormac's heart ached at the boy's words. He reached out, placing a firm, reassuring hand on Aedan's shoulder.
I'm sorry, lad. I never wanted to keep this from you, but I was afraid of losing you or of what it might mean if you knew. But no matter what, I've always thought of you as my son.
Aedan turned to Cormac, his expression resolute and filled with a deep, abiding affection.
It doesn't matter where I came from, Cormac. You're my father. You found me, you raised me, and everything I am is because of you. Whatever happened that night, it's in the past. You've given me a home and a life. That's all that matters.
A brief silence fell between them, filled with the crackle of the dying fire and the unspoken bond that had formed between them over the years. Cormac's eyes misted and he nodded, squeezing Aedan's shoulder as if to anchor him to the present, to the life they had built together.
You're a good lad, Aedan.
Cormac said, his voice thick with emotion.
And no matter what blood runs in your veins, you'll always be my son.
Aedan smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and gratitude. Whatever his origins, whatever the past had tried to take from him, it had also given him something precious, a father who had loved him without question, and a home forged in fire and strength. The morning was clear and crisp, with the first light of dawn illuminating the village in hues of gold. The forge was already alive with the crackle of fire, and Cormac and Aedan worked side by side, their movements synchronized from years of practice. A new order of swords had come in from the local guards, and they were hard at work preparing the blades that would defend their land.
Aedan,
Cormac said, wiping the sweat from his brow as he examined the half-finished sword in his hand.
We're running low on ore. I need you to head to the city and place an order for more.
Aedan nodded, eager as always to help with the work that had become his life.
I'll head out right away. I won't be long.
Cormac smiled and gave him a pat on the shoulder.
Take care, son. The roads are safe, but keep your wits about you. And don't let those merchants cheat you out of a fair price.
Aedan grinned, picking up his travel bag and slinging it over his shoulder.
Don't worry, Father. I'll be back before nightfall.
With that, Aedan set off, taking the familiar road that led from their quiet forge on the outskirts into the bustling heart of the city. The sun rose higher as he walked, warming his back and filling him with a sense of purpose. The city was busy, filled with the sounds of merchants hawking their wares and the clang of hammers as blacksmiths worked at their own forges. Aedan quickly found the ore merchant, haggling for the best price just as Cormac had taught him. He completed the order and set off for home, eager to tell Cormac of his success. But as Aedan approached the outskirts of the village, he noticed something was wrong. The air was thick with smoke, and a heavy silence hung where there should have been the usual sounds of daily life. His steps quickened, panic rising in his chest as he reached the village and saw the destruction before him. The houses were charred and smoldering, their walls blackened by fire. Villagers moved in a daze, tending to the wounded and sifting through the ruins of their homes. Aedan's heart pounded in his chest as he ran toward their forge, fear clutching at his throat. He stopped abruptly when he saw an old man, one of their neighbors, kneeling in the dirt, clutching his side where blood stained his tunic.
What happened?
Aedan asked, breathless.
Where is Father?
The old man looked up, pain etched into his weathered face.
The Vikings.
He rasped.
They came out of nowhere, raiders, they took everything. Cormac tried to fight them off, but...
His voice broke and he shook his head, unable to continue.
I'm sorry, Aedan. Cormac, he didn't make it.
The words hit Aedan like a blow to the chest. He staggered back, his vision swimming as he took in the devastation around him. His mind refused to process the truth, refused to accept that Cormac, the only father he had ever known, was gone. The strength in his legs gave way, and he found himself stumbling toward the river that ran beside their home, the river where Cormac had first found him so many years ago. Aedan sank to the ground by the water's edge, his knees in the soft, wet earth. Tears filled his eyes as he stared at the flowing water, the sound of the current echoing the turmoil inside him. He felt lost, adrift once more, as he had been on the night Cormac had pulled him from the river. Only this time there was no one to save him.
What do I do now?
Aedan whispered, his voice breaking.
I'm alone. I have no one left.
The river murmured softly, but it gave no answers. Aedan buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by grief and anger. He had trained to fight, trained to defend his home, but he had not been there when Cormac needed him most. The sense of helplessness was suffocating, and he felt as if the world had been stripped of all its light. But then, as if in response to his despair, a soft glow appeared beside him. Aedan looked up, blinking away tears, and gasped at what he saw. Before him stood a woman, her silhouette shimmering with a gentle, otherworldly light. She was beautiful, her features soft and serene, her long hair flowing as if caught in a breeze only she could feel. Her presence radiated warmth and comfort, like the first light of dawn breaking through a long, dark night.
Who are you?
Aedan stammered, his voice trembling as he stared at the glowing figure. The woman smiled, her eyes kind and filled with a deep, ancient wisdom.
I am the ancient goddess Danu, your mother,
she said, her voice soft and melodic like the tinkling of distant bells.
I have watched over you, Aedan, since the night you were cast into the river. You are not alone, even when you feel lost.
Aedan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard tales of spirits and guardians from the old legends, but he had never believed them, until now.
Why are you here?
He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper.
Danu,
Aedan whispered, his voice full of awe and disbelief.
You are my mother?
The goddess smiled, her expression filled with both pride and sadness.
Yes, Aedan. I am Danu, mother of many, and yours by blood. I have watched over you since you were born. I am sorry, my son, that you had to endure such pain, and that Cormac, who loved you with all his heart, is gone.
Aedan's eyes filled with tears, but he remained composed.
Why now?
He asked, his voice shaking slightly.
Why didn't you come sooner, Cormac? He was everything to me.
Danu's face softened, her light flickering softly as she spoke.
I could not interfere directly in your life, not in the way you might wish. Mortals have their ways, their choices. But I never stopped watching, never stopped caring. Cormac was not your father by blood, but he was a good man. He taught you strength, honor, and kindness, qualities that will serve you far better than anything else I could have given you.
Aedan nodded, swallowing hard.
He was the best father I could have asked for. But now he's gone and I don't know what to do.
Danu stepped closer, her presence enveloping Aedan like a warm embrace.
These are dark times, Aedan, but you are not without hope or help. I have come to offer you something that can guide you on your path, tools to help you find your way in these troubled days.
She held out her hands, and a magnificent sword appeared in a soft glow of light. its blade shining brightly. A small cauldron materialized next to it, seemingly ordinary but gleaming with ancient symbols.
This is the sword of Nuada.
Danu said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries.
This blade is like no other. When drawn, no foe can avoid it, and no shield can withstand its blow. It will answer your will, but use it wisely, for it is a weapon of great power.
Aedan hesitated before reaching out, his fingers brushing the hilt of the sword. It was perfectly balanced, its weight both comforting and terrifying. As he held it, he felt a surge of strength and purpose course through him, as if the sword itself had acknowledged him as its rightful owner.
And this
Danu continued, gesturing to the cauldron.
is the cauldron of Dagda, a gift from the gods to sustain those in need. It will never be empty, capable of feeding any number of hungry men. In a world torn by war and strife, this will be your way of bringing hope where there is despair.
Aedan looked at the cauldron, realizing the enormity of the gifts he had been given. These were not just tools of war. They were symbols of his responsibility, a legacy he was meant to uphold.
Why give them to me?
He asked, his voice thick with gratitude and uncertainty.
I am not a chieftain, not a great warrior.
Danu smiled softly, placing a hand on his cheek.
You are more than you know, Aedan. You have the heart of a leader and the soul of a warrior. You may not see it yet, but others will look to you in these dark times. You have the power to protect, to inspire, and to change the course of your destiny. These gifts are not a burden, but a means for you to realize the potential Cormac saw in you every day.
Aedan gripped his sword tighter, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He looked up at Dana, his eyes full of determination.
I will use these gifts wisely, thank you, Mother.
Danu nodded, her eyes twinkling with pride and sadness.
I know you will, my son. And remember, you will never be truly alone. I am always with you, in the wind, in the water, in the very earth beneath your feet. When you need strength, look to the world around you, for I am there.
With those last words, Danu began to fade, her light growing fainter until she was a gentle mist that slowly dissolved into the air. Aedan watched, his heart full but heavy, knowing that something unusual had touched him. He stood by the river holding Nuada's sword and looking at Dagda's cauldron, feeling for the first time that he had a path to follow. He had lost so much, but he had been given a chance to forge something new, to become not just a survivor but a protector, a leader, and perhaps one day a legend in his own right. With a determined sigh, Aedan sheathed his sword and turned back to the village, knowing that whatever trials lay ahead, he was ready to face them. The gods were with him, as was the memory of Cormac, guiding him like a beacon in the darkness.